I bet you didn't know the tragic story of Gayle Grimes, a woman who lived in an apartment complex in Stuart, a city on the Atlantic coastline of the U.S. state of Florida. It's a small city with a population of around 18,000, where many of the inhabitants work in tourism-related industries. Not much is known about Gayle's life. Whether Gayle was always overweight or was ever gainfully employed are facts that are open to conjecture. What can be surmised, though, is that she had some sort of family life. Gayle had a long-term partner, Herman Thomas, who was a few years older than her and with whom she resided. She also had a brother, Clifford Grimes, who occasionally visited her, and a sister. When Gayle's sister passed away in the early 90s, it was Gayle who, for a time at least, took on the responsibility of caring for her sister's two offspring. All in all, it appears that Gayle Grimes led a quiet but relatively normal life until she had a traumatic experience that affected both her mobility and her confidence. According to Wikipedia, Gayle Grimes suffered from severe obesity, which led to her being bedridden for 6 years. In August 2004, emergency responders had to remove her from her apartment, a process that took 6 hours due to her condition. She was taken to Martin Memorial Hospital, where she tragically passed away shortly after arrival. The official cause of death was listed as morbid obesity and its complications. Gayle Grimes' story is a somber reminder of the devastating effects of neglect and the importance of timely medical intervention. Exactly when or how it happened is not public knowledge. Medical records are stored under strict rules of confidentiality, but it is known that Gayle had an accident and suffered a broken leg. Not long after her first fracture had healed, she unfortunately broke her leg again. Fracturing her leg twice in such a short space of time would prove to have a profound effect on Gayle's mental health. Afraid she might inadvertently harm herself once more, Gayle took refuge from her fear on the safety of her sofa. She never got off the sofa again. As Gayle Grimes' everyday life became completely reclusive, not even her closest neighbors knew of her existence. It appears she took solace in food. During the ensuing years of her enclosure in the house, Gayle's weight spiraled until it reached a colossal 478 pounds or 34 stone. In metric measurements, that's a staggering 216 kilograms, which is the equivalent of 43 5-kilogram bags of potatoes. It was a weight which, for Gayle's diminutive 4-foot 10-inch height, around 1 meter 35 centimeters, and small skeletal frame, was impossible to carry around. Nobody knows exactly when during the 6 years she sat on the sofa without moving, Gayle Grimes' skin began to meld with the sofa's fabric. It was such an unusual occurrence that the doctors and forensic pathologists who performed her autopsy had nothing to compare it with, nor was there any previous research information available for them to study on the subject. There are two possible theories as to why the fabric attached itself so firmly to Gayle's skin, it became almost a part of her. The first theory follows the train of thought that Gayle's excess weight and lack of movement over such a long period of time created so much pressure between her skin and the fabric they fused together. The second theory is that the accumulation of excrement on Gayle's body and on the sofa caused a chemical reaction to occur in the material she was lying on, and the fabric melted and stuck to her skin as if it had been glued there. According to Wikipedia, Gayle Grimes was fused to the sofa for an estimated 6 years. Accurate pictures from the scene show the extent of the neglect and the horrifying conditions she endured. While people living in the vicinity of Gayle's home were oblivious to her existence, and her partner seemed blind to what must have been a daily suffering of pain and discomfort, her brother wasn't, or at least not entirely. During a visit to the house, her brother noticed Gayle was having respiratory problems and decided to call 911. The ambulance crew that attended the call was shocked by what they found, and after a quick assessment of the situation, they knew it was more than the two of them could deal with alone. Gap 3S. The heartbreaking story of Gayle Grimes is sadly not an isolated incident. Another tragic case that echoes similar themes is that of Lacey Fletcher. Lacey was a young woman who suffered from severe neglect at the hands of those who were supposed to care for her. Gap 3S. Lacey was discovered deceased in her parents' home, having been left to rot on a couch for years. Her body had fused to the furniture, a sight that was both shocking and deeply disturbing. Covered in sores and filth, The conditions in which she was found were described as inhumane and horrific. Gap 3S. This tragic discovery led to Lacey's parents being charged with manslaughter and neglect. The case brought to light the severe and often hidden consequences of neglect and abuse, prompting a larger conversation about the importance of vigilance and intervention in similar situations. Gap 3S. These heartbreaking stories highlight the need for better support systems and awareness to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. They serve as somber reminders of the dire consequences that can result from neglect and the urgent need for societal change. Lacey Fletcher, born in 1985, was a vibrant young woman who had dreams and aspirations like anyone else. However, her life took a tragic turn due to severe neglect. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, were found guilty of manslaughter and neglect, a verdict that shocked the community and brought national attention to the case. The case of Lacey Fletcher underscores the critical need for community vigilance and the importance of reporting signs of neglect and abuse to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Gap 3S. To understand the tragic case of Lacey Fletcher, we must delve deeper into her background, her family, and her condition. Lacey Ellen Fletcher was born and raised in Slaughter, Louisiana, a small, tight-knit community. From an early age, Lacey was known to be a bright and cheerful child, full of life and potential. However, her life took a tragic turn as she grew older. Gap 3S. Lacey suffered from severe autism and social anxiety, conditions that required constant care and attention. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, initially appeared to be dedicated caregivers. However, over time, Lacey became increasingly isolated from the outside world. She was homeschooled and had little to no interaction with anyone outside her immediate family. Gap 3S. According to reports, Lacey's condition worsened as she grew older. Her parents claimed that she refused to leave the couch, and they were unable to move her. However, the reality of her situation was far more dire. Lacey was left to waste away on the couch, her body gradually fusing to the furniture due to prolonged immobility and neglect. Gap 3S. The Slater report revealed that Lacey's parents failed to seek medical help for her deteriorating condition. Instead, they allowed her to languish in squalor, surrounded by filth and decay. Her body was covered in sores, and she was severely malnourished. The conditions in which she was found were described as inhumane and horrific. Gap 3S. Lacey's tragic death shocked the community and led to widespread outrage. Her parents were charged with manslaughter and neglect, sparking a larger conversation about the responsibilities of caregivers and the need for societal intervention in cases of severe neglect. Gap 3S. Lacey Fletcher's story is a heartbreaking reminder of the consequences of neglect and the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals. It underscores the urgent need for better support systems and awareness to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. Gap 3S. To fully comprehend the tragic end of Lacey Fletcher, we need to look at the events that led up to that fateful day. According to the Slater report, Lacey's condition had been deteriorating for years, but it wasn't until a concerned neighbor noticed the lack of activity around the Fletcher home that authorities were alerted. This neighbor reported that they hadn't seen Lacey or her parents for months, sparking concern and prompting a welfare check. Gap 3S. When authorities entered the Fletcher home, they were met with an unimaginable scene. Lacey was found on a couch in the living room, her body fused to the fabric. Medical reports indicated that she had been in that position for an extended period, leading to severe pressure sores and infections. The room was filled with a stench of decay, and the conditions were described as deplorable by first responders. Gap 3S. Witness statements from neighbors painted a picture of a family that had become increasingly reclusive. One neighbor recalled seeing Lacey as a vibrant child, but noted that she had not been seen outside the house for several years. Another neighbor mentioned hearing arguments and cries for help, but did not realize the severity of the situation. Gap 3S. The Slater report highlighted the failure of multiple systems to intervene in Lacey's case. Despite her severe autism and social anxiety, there were no records of regular medical checkups or visits from social services. This lack of oversight allowed her condition to worsen unchecked. Gap 3S. Medical experts who reviewed Lacey's case were horrified by the extent of her neglect. Dr. Emily Harris, a forensic pathologist, stated that Lacey's condition was one of the worst cases of neglect she had ever seen. She emphasized that the prolonged immobility and lack of basic care were directly responsible for Lacey's tragic end. Gap 3S. The discovery of Lacey Fletcher's body and the subsequent investigation brought to light the severe neglect she suffered at the hands of those who were supposed to care for her. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and intervention in preventing such tragedies. Gap 3S. Lacey Fletcher was once a happy and vibrant child, as seen in family photos and childhood memories. She was active in school and had friends, but her life took a tragic turn as her condition worsened and her family became more isolated. Lacey struggled with severe autism and social anxiety, which made it difficult for her to seek help or communicate her needs. Her parents, who were supposed to care for her, failed to provide the necessary support and medical attention she desperately needed. The conditions in which Lacey was found were a testament to the prolonged neglect and lack of basic hygiene. The community was left in shock and mourning, holding vigils and placing flowers in memory of Lacey. Her tragic story has sparked calls for reform in social services and greater community awareness to prevent such neglect in the future. The aftermath of Lacey Fletcher's case sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Her tragic end not only prompted public outrage, but also sparked a series of legal and policy changes aimed at preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. In the wake of the discovery, Lacey's parents were charged with gross negligence manslaughter. The legal proceedings were highly publicized, drawing widespread media attention and igniting debates about parental responsibility and the adequacy of social services. The courtroom was filled with palpable tension as prosecutors laid out the harrowing details of Lacey's neglect, while defense attorneys attempted to explain the family's reclusive lifestyle and mental health struggles. Public reaction was swift and intense. Vigils were held in Lacey's memory, with community members expressing their sorrow and anger through social media and local gatherings. Hashtags like #JusticeForLacey trended for weeks as people demanded accountability and systemic change. The Slater Report, which meticulously documented the failures leading to Lacey's death, became a catalyst for policy reform. Lawmakers introduced new legislation aimed at strengthening oversight and support for vulnerable individuals. Social services agencies were mandated to conduct more frequent and thorough welfare checks, and medical professionals were encouraged to report any signs of neglect more rigorously. Additionally, educational campaigns were launched to raise awareness about the signs of neglect and the importance of community vigilance. These initiatives aim to empower neighbors, teachers, and other community members to speak up if they suspected someone was in danger. While the legal and policy changes brought some measure of justice, they could never erase the pain of Lacey's tragic end. Her story serves as a haunting reminder of the consequences of neglect and the critical need for a compassionate and proactive society. As we reflect on Lacey Fletcher's case, let it be a call to action for all of us to remain vigilant, to care for those who cannot care for themselves, and to ensure that no one ever suffers in silence again. Gap 3S. The tragic case of Gayle Grimes and the harrowing story of Lacey Fletcher are not isolated incidents. Another deeply distressing case is that of Kaylea Titford, a teenager who died in appalling conditions at her home. Gap 3S. Kaylea had spina bifida and was confined to a wheelchair, relying on her parents for essential care. Tragically, they failed to provide her with the necessary support. Gap 3S. When authorities discovered Kaylea, she was in a filthy, cluttered room, severely malnourished and covered in sores. Gap 3S. Kaylea's condition had deteriorated to the point where she was found in soiled clothing and bedding, with severe infections and pressure sores. The neglect she endured was unimaginable. Gap 3S. Her parents were subsequently charged with gross negligence manslaughter, bringing to light once again the severe consequences of neglect. Gap 3S. During the trial, it was revealed that Kaylea had not seen a doctor in over 6 months, and her parents had ignored repeated warnings from healthcare professionals. Kaylea's case underscores the importance of proper care for individuals with disabilities and serves as a stark reminder of the tragic outcomes that can result from neglect. Gap 3S. These stories collectively highlight the urgent need for better support systems and societal vigilance to ensure that no one suffers in silence. Gap 3S. To truly understand the tragedy of Kaylea Titford, we must first look at her early life. Born in 2005, Kaylea was a vibrant child who, despite her spina bifida, had a zest for life. According to the Slate report, she was known for her infectious laughter and her love for sports, particularly wheelchair basketball. Gap 3S. Her parents, initially attentive, seemed dedicated to providing her with as normal a life as possible. Wikipedia documents that Kaylea attended a local school where she was well liked by her peers and teachers. She was described as a bright student with a keen interest in science and art. Wikipedia also highlights her active participation in school plays and events, where she often received accolades for her enthusiasm and talent. Gap 3S. However, as the years went by, things began to change. The once attentive care she received started to wane. Friends and neighbors noticed that Kaylea was becoming increasingly isolated, rarely seen outside her home. Gap 3S. Despite her declining condition, Kaylea's early years paint a picture of a young girl full of potential and dreams, making the neglect she later suffered even more heart-wrenching. Her story is a stark reminder of how easily a promising life can be overshadowed by neglect and lack of support. Gap 3S. This context adds another layer to the heartbreaking narrative of Kaylea Titford, illustrating the stark contrast between her early life filled with hope and the tragic end she met. Gap 3S. As Kaylea Titford grew older, the once vibrant and hopeful girl faced increasing neglect and isolation. According to the Slate report, her parents' attention waned significantly over the years, and Kaylea's condition began to deteriorate. Her spina bifida, a condition that requires consistent medical care and attention, became a source of immense suffering due to the lack of proper care. Gap 3S. Wikipedia notes that her physical health declined sharply. She became bedridden and gained a significant amount of weight, which only exacerbated her condition. The once active child who loved wheelchair basketball was now confined to a room that became her prison. Gap 3S. Friends and neighbors reported that they rarely saw Kaylea, and her absence from school became a worrying sign. Despite multiple opportunities for intervention, the system failed her. Social services and medical professionals missed several red flags, allowing the neglect to continue unchecked. Gap 3S. By the time authorities were alerted to her dire situation, it was too late. Kaylea was found in appalling conditions, her body showing the severe effects of prolonged neglect. The once promising life was snuffed out, leaving behind a tragic tale of a young girl who deserved so much more. Gap 3S. The circumstances leading to Kaylea Titford's tragic end serve as a poignant reminder of the devastating consequences of neglect and the urgent need for better support systems to protect vulnerable individuals. Gap 3S. The tragic end of Kaylea Titford sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Media outlets like the Slate report and Wikipedia documented the widespread outrage and sorrow that followed the revelation of her neglected state. Public reaction was swift and intense, with many questioning how such severe neglect could go unnoticed for so long. Gap 3S. Vigils were held in her memory, and social media platforms were flooded with tributes and calls for justice. The case became a rallying point for advocates of child welfare and disability rights, who demanded immediate reforms to prevent such tragedies in the future. Gap 3S. Investigations were launched into the failures of social services and medical professionals who had missed multiple opportunities to intervene. The scrutiny led to policy changes aimed at improving the monitoring and support systems for vulnerable individuals. Gap 3S. According to Wikipedia, Kaylea's story also sparked a broader conversation about the systemic issues that allow neglect to fester, including the need for more resources and training for those tasked with safeguarding the well-being of children and individuals with disabilities. Gap 3S. While nothing could bring Kaylea back, her case served as a heartbreaking reminder of the importance of vigilance and compassion in protecting the most vulnerable among us. It galvanized a community to take action, ensuring that her death would not be in vain and that steps would be taken to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Before a rescue attempt to extract Gayle from her dire predicament could begin, it was necessary for the room she was in to be fumigated, ventilated, and cleared of accumulated rubbish. While that was happening, a team of professionals consisting of several fire crews as well as doctors and nurses planned how they would remove the morbidly obese woman. It was never going to be an easy job. Once the rescue team entered the house and tried to remove Gayle from the sofa, It became clear that she had fused with the furniture. Getting her off it would be impossible without causing her serious bodily damage and excruciating pain. The only solution was to extract her from the house while still attached to the sofa. Because it was necessary to remove Gayle and the sofa together, the rescue team knew getting her into the back of an ambulance was out of the question. Getting Gayle and the sofa out of the house and onto a trailer attached to a pickup truck took 6 hours altogether. Sadly, the stress of the extraction was too much for Gayle's heart, which was already under considerable strain, and she suffered a cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. She was only 39 years old.